Today I'm going to be reviewing the TerraMaster F2-212. This is an entry-level 2-bay NAS, and I'm going to take a look at how well an entry-level NAS can connect drives to the network, and also just see how well the unit works overall. As a disclaimer, this unit was provided to me by TerraMaster for the purpose of this review, although no money has changed hands. I also want to know from you guys, what are your thoughts on me doing reviews on NAS units like this? Should I try to do more of them? Less of them? What should I focus on? What do you think I missed? Is there any specific units you want me to take a look at? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll definitely be reading those comments and taking them into consideration when planning future videos. But let's take a look at the unit I have in front of me now. This unit is a small plastic enclosure and nearly as small as you're going to get for storing two 3.5-inch hard drives in it. On the front of the unit are the two 3.5-inch hard drive bays, which are toolless for 3.5-inch drives, and there's included screws if you want to use 2.5-inch drives. My only annoyance with the hard drive bays is you have to get a little torquey if you want to put in 2.5-inch drives because the rubber sticks out a bit farther than it probably should. There's also a few LED indicators for drive activity and power on the front of the unit. The side of the units are mostly blank other than the logos, which also work as air intakes. Moving over to the back of the unit, there's the exhaust fan that is fairly quiet under normal auto settings, but if you turn it to silent settings, it's effectively silent unless you're right up next to it. The other aspect of this NAS that makes noise is the hard drives that are installed on it. Some hard drives, especially 7200 RPM drives, can get fairly noisy, and the head sink noise can be quite noticeable in a room like this. I'd suggest looking for silent drives if noise is a major issue, or going with SSDs if you want this unit to be near silent. The other parts on the back of the unit includes two USB ports, a 3.0 and a 2.0, a power switch, a gigabit Ethernet port, and a 12-volt 4-amp power input. Power consumption-wise, with my two 5400 RPM 8TB shuck drives that I used for the majority of this testing, this system sat between 14 and 15 watts almost all the time. Putting the CPU under heavy load, they used very little extra power, showing to the fact that this is a very low power CPU in this unit. And the majority of power is being used by the drives. So for a little bit of testing, I tried swapping out my mechanical hard drives with some SSDs, and I saw power in the low single digits, about 3 to 4 watts typically. So the majority of the power is being used by the hard drives. In order to help minimize that, I would love to see better controls over hard drive spin down on this unit. I couldn't find a setting to change that in the OS on this unit, and it seemed like some hard drives would spin down, but some don't, and I believe there's a bit more settings you can control in a drive that wasn't presented in this OS that I'd love to see. But overall, this is a very low power consumption unit. It's going to be hard to beat power consumption wise. One other note I want to make with hard drives is I tried using hard drives that require the 3.3 volt disabled in order to spin up, and they work just fine in this unit. I also took this unit apart because I was curious what's inside of it. Luckily, it comes apart pretty easily with a few easily accessible screws on the back of this unit, and I can see the little daughter board that connects the SATA ports to the back of the drives, as well as the main board which had the processor on it, a little bit of memory, and all the other components. Overall, very simple design, no major issues that I saw internally. Software-wise, this unit comes with TerraMaster's TNAS OS, and for the purpose of this video, I was using TNAS OS version 5.1.73. There doesn't seem to be any option to install alternate operating systems that TerraMaster has provided, and I couldn't find an easy way to do so myself, and thanks to this being an ARM processor with limited RAM, there didn't seem to be much regards putting a lot of the major NAS OSs on this unit. But overall, using TerraMaster's NAS OS was fine. I'd say other NAS OS's units on the market are a bit more refined when it comes to the UI and other little bits of their interface, but TerraMaster's OS is far from bad and more than enough to do all the basic NAS file sharing duties. Taking a look at the interface here, it's relatively similar to other NAS OSs on the market, with kind of a desktop-like interface where there's little windows within a web browser. You can open a file manager to view all your files on the system, download it within the browser. You have a control panel for setting up different aspects of the system, like RAID, viewing drive health, and nothing major is missing. It's relatively intuitive to set up a RAID array, mount that RAID array on the system, and then set up some file shares to access systems on the network. TerraMaster's OS also allows you to go above and beyond and have an app store to run additional apps on the system for added functionality. But in general, I'd say you probably want to stay away from doing anything remotely intensive with those additional apps. I tried a little bit with Plex, which is included on their app store, and worked just fine. But even installing Plex, especially if the background file copy, would take a little bit of time. I can load into Plex and use the interface fine, but when I want to get into playback, even doing direct play of 1080p media would get very sluggish when scrubbing, so probably don't want to use a Plex, and you're better off doing direct playing files directly off of an SMB share rather than using a media share on this unit, and transcoding is almost a non-option. While they advertise some 4K media transcoding, that doesn't seem to be supported in Plex or MB or other processes, and looking at the Plex wiki here shows no support for hardware accelerated transcoding and very limited support for doing it on the CPU. So it's probably nice for file sharing only, but not much more. Arguably, I'd say the OS does a little bit better than some of the more DIY NAS OSs, like easy to set up email alerts on this system, being able to do a very easy remote access without having to set up port forwarding or anything through your router is a nice feature on the system. And I think there's no major issues, and it does everything it says it do. I can't really complain it. If you want a basic NAS, it'll be a pretty nice setup for just kind of setting this up, forgetting it, and emailing you when something goes wrong, or using its little buzzer to tell you when a drive has failed so you don't forget about it. Can't really make any major complaints, but don't expect to do much in terms of apps on this unit because it is an entry-level NAS with limited processing and RAM to use to do those processes with. File copy performance on this NAS was fine. It effectively fills up gigabit networking and performs about the same as any other NAS on a gigabit network. Here's a Crystal DiskMark screenshot using it with mechanical hard drives. SSDs here didn't make really any significant difference, showing that it's most likely the network limiting me here. And they also did a 2 terabyte file copy and saw no slowdown for long duration file copies, which all looks good to me. This system works just fine as a gigabit network NAS, but don't expect too much more out of it performance-wise, and I think that's about what you can see. I think TerraMaster themselves summed up the performance of this NAS quite well, which is adequate for home document backup and providing a multimedia entertainment. As long as you don't want to transcode or really use something advanced like Plex, it'll be fine. And overall, in conclusion, this unit does what it says it does. It copies files over a network and is probably one of the cheapest and easiest ways to set up a basic gigabit NAS of 2 mechanical hard drives. It does it using very little power, generally stays near silent, and no major issues using it. Looking at other alternatives for something in this price class on the market, really there isn't too much. You can get a 1-bay NAS from potentially a different brand that might have a better interface, but then you're only at 1 bay, which I'd probably take this 2 bay over a slightly higher quality 1 bay because it's still not going to be a great 1 bay NAS in terms of processing likely. You could go with an old used desktop PC, but significantly more power consumption most likely, and you're going to have to do a lot more DIY setup. That could be a better solution for your use case, but really depends on exactly what you want to do on a NAS. I think the system fits quite well into its super budget 2 bay NAS. It's great for doing that. System also could make a good amount of sense if you want an offsite backup unit. Its offsite capabilities of being essentially plug and play on a remote network make it pretty good for a set it in some other location and tell it to automatically sync backups offsite. Let me know what you thought of this review in the comments below, and thanks for watching.